Basically, how Photoshop operates is that you're creating a composite image using multiple layers. And so think of a layer as kind of an acetate sheet or a vellum sheet that you could stack on top of each other. And each has their own information or image or text that you could overlay on top of each other. So it is order dependent how you place your layers on top of each other. And from there, you get your composite image. So here to the right, is everyone able to see this? This is the column for layers, and each one has its own type of information. So if I were to click on the eyeball to the left of it, I can toggle if they are visible or not. So if they're invisible, you don't have to worry about them being edited or manipulated while you're manipulating the other layers. So what I want to do is create a scene, a rendering with people, sky, house, and trees. And hopefully this will be useful later in the year when you're starting to make your renderings for your own buildings.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
Are we following along with you on the screen, or do you have like a file for us to work with?
I don't have a file. This one was a bit too large.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just
Weirdly.
wondering.
But if you want, you could try to follow along. It's very rudimentary, so you could just
cool.
take images from online and try to apply them.
Thanks.
So here at the bottom corner, we have the layers tab, so you could create a new layer. And if I were to hide all these by clicking and dragging the eyeballs, there's nothing on it. It's just a clear sheet. And I could copy and paste something so that it would enter onto the sheet, like this lady. So I just click Control V, Control Paste, and she's now on this layer. And you can see that in the little tab that she's there. I'll delete her by pressing this garbage can, so that'll delete the layer. I'll replace these layers now. And so this, as you can see, is on top. If I were to drag it down to below the sky, she'll be hidden because the sky is taking up the whole canvas space and she is below. So that's the importance of the order of layers, knowing what goes on top and what goes below. So I'm going to place the sky right at the bottom because I know it's going to be at the background. And this now reveals all the different layers that have been covered by the sky. I will place the house now just by clicking and dragging, and you'll see that there's going to be a white line in between the layers. That's how you know it'll be slotted into it properly. So I'm going to place the house now on top of the sky, and the people, for the trees, I'm going to place them also behind the house, actually. I like them to be in the background. A simple way, instead of selecting the layers, is to click this auto select button. So instead of having to identify what it is on the tab here, you can simply click it and drag it. So make sure that this tab next to the auto select is selecting layers. Otherwise, if it's under group, you'll be selecting a group if you've created one, which I will show in a bit. So I'll switch it back to layers and drag this tree just behind this house, kind of like the backyard, maybe this tree as well. So they got this luscious vegetation. Now I'm going to select the people and I'll show you how to transform them. If you press Control T while you're selecting a layer, you'll have the option to transform the content within that layer. So the only content available on this layer is this woman holding the umbrella. Now I could squish her, I can make her really long, really tall, really large, tiny. And I'm guessing that you guys want to keep the proportions, so holding Shift will lock these proportions. And so you can scale it without destroying the original image essentially. If you are to scale upwards, just realize that you're trying to create more information than the original image has. So it's going to look blurry. You're going to have pixels that are duplicating so that they uh, retain as much of that original information as possible. So if you are going to download images from Google or online, make sure it's big enough, but not too big also, because otherwise you're going to have a really large file, and that's a lot of problems caused because students have too large of a file and they go corrupt and they can't send it to the prof, and you don't want that because it's a headache. So make sure you have it at an appropriate size, kind of like this, and able to scale it downwards. So I'll scale this lady like here and press enter to apply the changes. I'll go around the lots and just select them, scale them, hold shift to keep the proportions, select, Control T to transform, move them around. I don't know, he's playing at the front yard. She's just getting her groceries today. They all live in a co-housing, so it's cool. All right, there's also several options that you could do with transform. So once you're in that dialog space, you can right click and have these sorts of options which do a lot more funkier stuff. So if I were to click this corner tab, you can distort her in this manner. There's also perspective, which is useful because sometimes you're building. I'll select the house actually. Control T, select perspective, and now this might help with getting the perspective right with the scene, especially if you have like numerous buildings or massing as your background and it's just not lining up properly. So this is a very useful tool, especially, but it looks fine for now. So I'm gonna keep it there and move my groceries lady to the bottom. Okay, so that's kind of the basics with layers. We'll introduce now adjustment layers, which help modify the content you have on a layer. So this guy to me is a bit too bright. I kind of want it gloomy like today. I can choose from this panel a bunch of different options, which will manipulate the tonal range, so the values, the darkness and the lightness of the image, and also the colors. So here, for example, with the black and white adjustment layer, if I were to click it, I can remove all the color, but I don't want to do that. So I will delete this. And instead, I will click the first one, which is brightness and contrast. For this tutorial, I'll move this adjustment layer to the top just to show you why it's important to have a proper order. And I will decrease the brightness for this. And what you will notice that not only does the sky get darker, but everything that's below this adjustment layer essentially will become darker. And I only want the sky to be dark. So I'm gonna drag this adjustment layer to just above the sky, and everything below it will be affected. Everything above will not. So that's why it's important to have the layers. Do we have any questions so far? Are we going at a good pace? No? Okay. Sometimes though, let's say you want to affect just the house, but then you also have trees behind it. You don't want that to be affected. So you're kind of wondering, why are these affected? Because it's below, but you only want it to affect the house. You can clip this adjustment layer to the layer below it by either right-clicking on this layer and selecting Create Clipping Mask. So now it's only attached to the house, And if I were to adjust the parameters, you'll notice that the house and the ground, because it's attached to the image, are affected. So that's a nice way to isolate an image to manipulate its tonal range. Another way to do it, if I were to deselect it, is to hold Alt, or if you're using a Mac, hold Option, and hover above the line that's between the adjustment layer and the layer with the content. So once I hold Alt and click, then that's also automatically going to clip the adjustment layer to the layer below it. Okay, and so similarly, you can clip your adjustment layers to a group. It's very important to create groups from the get-go, because you'll start to notice that once you're editing really small things, you're going to have multiple layers, and that's going to start to stack up, and you're going to lose track of what you're working on. And when deadline comes, you're like, oh my God, which layer is it? So to create a group, we have this folder below. So click that, and we have our group. Once you click this arrow that's in left-right orientation, and it moves to up-down orientation, that'll show you what's inside it. Right now, we don't have anything in. So what we could do is let's group the people by selecting each one individually by either pressing Control, selecting them individually, or you could hold one, press Shift, and then press the last one of the set, and you'll select them all. Then from there, I could click on the group or the set of people and drag it into the group folder. Now, if I were to click this play button or this arrow, you'll see that everything is grouped within this folder. Important to name your folders, be organized in that way. I'll name this people, and I'll do the same for the rest of the layers. This one will be base image folder. And instead of creating the folder first and then dragging these items in, I could similarly just select all these layers and just click the group folder at the bottom. And this one I'll rename as base image. Okay, yeah, that's all for that. I understand your project currently is sketching the city. Is that right, June? Is June on?
Yes, I'm here. So sketching, but because of COVID, they're actually sketching abstract boxes, and they're sketching a coffee cup.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was gonna use an example from my year when we had to sketch the city. So I don't know if you have a digital submission, but sometimes you have to take photos.
It is digital, because
there is digital?
Well, we can't meet in person, so yes.
Yeah, okay, yep, you're right. So you'll either be scanning or taking a photo, but I don't advise taking a photo. Scan if you can. Scan if you can. But if you can't and you have to take a photo, you'll probably need to adjust the sketch or the image so that it looks like it's been scanned. So this is one I just pulled up a file. So file, open, and it'll send to the folder that you have your files. This one turned out in the wrong orientation. So if that happens to you, you can go to image at the top bar with that, scroll down to image rotation and fix the orientation this way. I'm gonna rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise, and that should fix it. And if we're going to apply some of the adjustment layers that we did from the other file here, you'll probably want to increase the brightness and contrast so that some of the the darkness, especially when you're taking a photo, doesn't appear. So this will help you adjust those levels. Okay, and you'll notice, you see the difference between the original and the adjusted by just deselecting the layer, or hiding the layer, I mean. Okay. We have a little bit of time, and Leo told me not to do this, but I'm gonna just introduce one more quick item that is gonna be very, very useful, I feel. So first, double click this layer because it's locked. So now you can edit it. And I would always suggest to duplicate a base image, especially if it's a sketch, because that way if you start making changes that you can't revert back, you can always default back to this, knowing that it's there. So I have my original image. I'll rename that, and then I'll hide it. And then I have my new sketch. I'll rename that to sketch. This can be taken out for the sake of this tutorial. Layer mask is a very easy way to edit your images without really destroying the original information. So I see a lot of students in the CAD lab, they like to erase little smudges and stuff. For example, here there's undesirables because I was using vellum. But I don't advise that because then once things are gone, you can't get it back. So instead, I would use a layer mask, which is this button below. Add a layer mask. And what that essentially does is it's adding another sort of acetate layer where you can adjust the transparencies of the image on the layer or the content on the layer. And to do that, we use the black and white brush, or just black and white in general, to either increase the transparency or increase the opacity. Black increases the transparency while white increases the opacity. That might be a bit difficult to understand, but let me show you with an example. What I'll do is I'll create a new layer here that's just below the layer that I want to adjust. This one will be, this right now is clear, but I'll add a white to the background using the paint bucket tool. I'll re-show the layer above, and now I'll click the layer mask to start doing my adjustments. If I click B, which is the brush, and that's the tool over there, and I make the color black, I'll be able to essentially erase the image. But I'm not erasing. What I'm actually doing is I'm making this base image more transparent to reveal the white layer below. And so if I were to select the layer mask again, but this time paint with a white color, and to do that easily, you just press X and you'll see that you'll switch between the two colors that are already preset. If I start painting with the white, I'm going to increase the opacity. So I am regaining the information that I had on this layer, and you could do that and have your image back. So this is really useful when you want to like clean up the edge. Like I don't like these loose strands, right? So I'll start painting it with black, making it a lot cleaner. And oh, but I accidentally did too much. So instead I will revert back to white and maybe make this a bit smaller to regain that information that I lost. Okay. And if you don't like any of that, you could select the layer mask by right-clicking it, disabling it to see what the original looks like, or full on out deleting it. So that's a quick primer on layer mask, but I feel like we're going to do a more in-depth discussion tutorial following this. So is there any questions regarding layers, layer mask, and adjustment layers so far? Nope, everyone's good, everyone's Gucci.
I can say that I took like a basic Photoshop tutorial before, and
Yeah.
that's like what you just said now is the best way I've heard how to describe layer masks. Like I never understood it before until now. So thanks.
Oh, okay, great. I'm glad you understood. Yeah, when I was learning, I'm like, I don't get why is there black, why is there white? But you're
Yeah.
just basically playing with transparencies. So
Also,
There's a
some
question
comments
also
in
from
the
Sana.
chat.
Yeah.
sure, is this on the chat?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, there's a lot. Okay, I'll go through them all.
Okay, just Eric, is your Rhina tutorial scheduled for 10:30?
Yep.
I'm afraid that that's running out of time.
Okay, I'll just answer this one question. So Sana Ahmed says, how do you determine what goes on a layer? What goes on a layer is basic. You can either control paste, so you could copy from the internet, like a PNG of somebody, click a new layer, like this, and just add it by Control V. So we have our umbrella lady again because she's on our clipboard. Or you can click File, Open, and whatever
So I understand how
image you want, you can place
yeah,
it.
but what's the active layer? Like, what's your active layer? How do you determine on what layer it goes?
Okay, so your active layer is basically whichever is highlighted in blue. So I'll click a bunch of layers here. And I could add my umbrella lady to each one. So now she's added onto this selected layer. And if I were to click it, she'd be here. If I
So when you're putting like the umbrella lady on all of them, how do you determine what the maximum is for one layer? Like for example, like what if you had like just her in one and like had the umbrella in a second layer? Like what's the difference of putting the full image in one or breaking apart the image and doing separate layers?
It's actually a very good question.
You have more freedom to, I guess, stack them because you're breaking up into two different components. But in terms of your final image, there wouldn't really be a difference. You're just organizing it differently.
So ultimately you can have as many layers as you want or not as many as you want, but then that just affects the editing process.
Yes, correct, exactly. So your umbrella will be in another layer and your woman will be in a different layer. Mm-hmm. Or you can have them in one, which if you don't think you'll be adjusting specifically the umbrella, then it might be easier to keep it on one layer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the more layers you have, the larger your file gets. So it is advisable to try to keep it as
compact,
efficient and compact as possible. Yeah.
Actually, this question, thank you. It's an essential and brilliant question. So even if we are talking about Photoshop and raster images and say Rhina and models, the main question, how you organize your image or your model, and the main question, first of all, to make it easy to edit and to create, and second, to make it easy to modify parts which probably will need like modification in the future. So you are thinking ahead how you kind of split it in parts to make your modifications in the future easier. And Eric, yeah, it's like Eric describes how to organize your layers, because layers is one of the main organization tool in raster editors like Photoshop. In 3D modelers, we have a little bit more organization tools.